For decades, the conflict between Israel and Iran was a so-called shadow war. It was fought through proxies, cyber attacks, and targeted assassinations. Iran armed groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Israel, in turn, was widely believed to be behind mysterious explosions at Iranian nuclear sites and the elimination of key Iranian scientists. This was a deadly but contained struggle. Neither side wanted a direct all-out war. The risks were simply too high for both Tehran and Jerusalem. They understood that a full-scale conflict would devastate their economies, societies, and regional standing, creating unpredictable and catastrophic outcomes for everyone involved. The fragile balance was maintained through a shared, unspoken understanding of mutual deterrence. This delicate equilibrium, however, began to fray. Tensions escalated following a series of increasingly bold actions. Iran's proxies grew more aggressive, launching sophisticated drone and missile attacks against Israeli and allied targets. Israel responded with more overt airstrikes inside Syria, targeting Iranian military assets and personnel with greater frequency and intensity. The shadow war was becoming less shadowy. The buffer zones were shrinking. Each action prompted a reaction, creating a dangerous cycle of escalation. The international community, particularly the United States and European powers, issued warnings and attempted diplomacy, but the underlying drivers of the conflict remained unresolved and potent. The final straw came last month. A sophisticated cyber attack attributed to Iran crippled a significant portion of Israel's critical infrastructure, including its power grid and water systems. This was not a proxy attack. It was a direct assault on the Israeli state and its civilian population. Israel viewed this as an act of war, a red line that had been crossed decisively. The response was swift and unprecedented. Israeli warplanes for the first time openly struck a major military command center deep inside Iran. The shadow war was over. Open warfare had begun, pulling the entire Middle East toward a precipice it had long sought to avoid. The initial volleys were fierce. Iran retaliated for the Israeli airstrike by launching hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles toward Israel. While most were intercepted by Israel's advanced air defense systems, the scale of the attack was a profound shock. It demonstrated a new level of Iranian capability and willingness to engage directly. The conflict had entered a terrifying new phase, moving from covert operations to direct state-on-state military confrontation. The world watched in horror as two of the region's most powerful militaries finally came to blows, ending decades of carefully managed coexistence and igniting a conflict with no clear off-ramp. The United States has always been Israel's most crucial ally. For years, Washington provided military aid, diplomatic support, and a security umbrella. However, direct military intervention in a conflict between Israel and Iran was a step previous administrations had painstakingly avoided. The potential costs were seen as immense. It risked dragging the United States into another protracted and costly Middle Eastern war. The official policy was to support Israel's right to defend itself while using diplomacy and sanctions to contain Iran. This strategy aimed to prevent a regional conflagration that would endanger American troops, disrupt global energy markets, and destabilize an already volatile part of the world. The game changed on the 22nd of June, after Iran launched a second, more powerful wave of missiles aimed at Israeli population centers and military bases. The White House made a momentous decision. American aircraft operating from bases in the region and from the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford joined Israeli forces in a coordinated counterstrike. The primary targets were not just missile launch sites, but key facilities associated with Iran's nuclear program, including the heavily fortified Fordo fuel enrichment plant, Natanz, and Isfahan. This was not merely defensive support. It was a direct, offensive military action by the United States against the Islamic Republic of Iran, a clear and unambiguous entry into the war. The justification from Washington was clear. The White House stated that Iran's unprecedented and reckless aggression posed an imminent threat to regional stability and to American personnel stationed throughout the Middle East. The official line was that the strikes were a limited and necessary action to degrade Iran's ability to continue its attacks and, crucially, to prevent it from using the chaos of war to make a final dash toward a nuclear weapon. The administration framed the intervention as a move to prevent a wider war, arguing that a nuclear-armed Iran, emboldened by a successful conventional war, would be a far greater threat to world peace. It was a high-stakes gamble, predicated on the idea of a decisive but contained blow. This decision represents a fundamental shift in American policy. It moves beyond containment and deterrence to direct military confrontation. The calculation is that a swift and overwhelming show of force will compel Tehran to stand down and accept de-escalation from a position of weakness. However, it is a strategy fraught with peril. It assumes the Iranian regime will react rationally and choose self-preservation over a potentially suicidal escalation. By crossing the Rubicon of direct military engagement, the United States has tied its own prestige and security directly to the outcome of this conflict, transforming a regional war into a global crisis with profound and uncertain consequences. The immediate impact of the United States strikes has sent shockwaves across the Middle East. For Israel, the American intervention is a massive strategic victory. It confirms the unbreakable nature of the United States-Israel alliance in the most tangible way possible. The involvement of American air power not only helps degrade Iranian military capabilities, but also sends a powerful message of deterrence to Iran and its proxies like Hezbollah. Israeli leaders are likely feeling emboldened, believing they now have a freer hand to pursue their war aims with the full backing of the world's greatest superpower. This could lead them to expand their objectives, aiming for a more decisive and permanent blow against Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure. For Iran, the situation is dire. The regime now faces a two-front war against both Israel and the United States. The strikes on its nuclear facilities represent a devastating blow, setting back its decades-long multi-billion-dollar program. Domestically, the government must manage the fallout of a significant military humiliation while grappling with a population already restive under economic sanctions and political repression. The leadership in Tehran is now at a critical crossroads. Do they absorb the blow and seek a way to de-escalate, or do they retaliate against American targets in the region, risking a full-scale war with the United States that they almost certainly cannot win? Their next move will be critical. Neighboring Arab states in the Gulf, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, are in a precarious position. On one hand, they quietly welcome the degradation of the military power of their primary regional rival, Iran. They have long feared Iran's nuclear ambitions and its support for disruptive proxy forces. On the other hand, they are now on the front line of a potential region-wide war. They host major United States military bases, making them potential targets for Iranian retaliation. These nations are urging restraint on all sides, desperately trying to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Their diplomatic channels are working overtime to find an off-ramp before the conflict spirals completely out of control. Globally, the reaction has been one of alarm. Global oil prices surged over 15% in the hours following the announcement of the United States strikes, reflecting fears of a major disruption to shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, through which a fifth of the world's oil passes. World leaders from Beijing to Brussels have called for an immediate ceasefire and a return to diplomacy. The United Nations Security Council has convened an emergency session. The fear is that this conflict could easily escalate beyond the Middle East, drawing in other powers and creating the most significant international security crisis since the end of the Cold War. The entire world is now watching and waiting. In the short term, two starkly different paths emerge: rapid escalation or forced de-escalation. The most dangerous scenario is a wider war. If Iran feels its survival is at stake, it could retaliate by attacking United States bases in Qatar, Bahrain, or Iraq. It could unleash its most powerful proxy, Hezbollah, to launch a massive missile assault on Israel from Lebanon, opening a devastating northern front. This would trigger a massive Israeli and American response, plunging the entire region into a catastrophic conflict that could dwarf the recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. This path would lead to immense bloodshed, a global economic crisis, and unpredictable geopolitical realignment. Conversely, the sheer shock of the American intervention could, paradoxically, create an opening for de-escalation. Faced with the combined might of Israel and the United States, the Iranian regime may conclude that further conflict is futile. This could lead to back-channel negotiations, perhaps mediated by countries like Oman or Qatar. The goal would be a quick ceasefire to prevent further destruction. Such a de-escalation through escalation would be a bitter pill for Iran to swallow, but it might be preferable to total regime collapse. This outcome hinges on the United States and Israel offering a clear, face-saving off-ramp for Tehran coupled with credible threats of further annihilation if it is not taken. Looking toward the medium and long term, the region's balance of power is set to be fundamentally altered. If the conflict is contained, the United States intervention will reassert American dominance in the Middle East, a position that many had seen as waning. It could also accelerate the normalization of relations between Israel and key Arab states like Saudi Arabia, as they form a more formal united front against a weakened Iran. This would create a new security architecture in the region, one centered on an anti-Iran coalition backed by American military power. This new alignment could foster a degree of stability, but it would be a tense peace built on military deterrence. The most likely outcome, given the current dynamics as of today, June 23, 2025, is a tense, combustible, and unstable de-escalation. Iran will likely avoid a direct, full-scale retaliation against the United States to ensure its own survival. However, it will not simply capitulate. We can expect it to revert to its old playbook, asymmetric warfare. This means more attacks by its proxies, more cyber operations, and a covert effort to rebuild its nuclear program with a renewed sense of vengeance. The open war will recede, but the shadow war will return with greater intensity. The world should watch for signs of proxy attacks, Iranian nuclear activity, and the delicate diplomatic dance between Washington, its allies, and Tehran. The crisis may cool, but the conflict is far from over. If you found this video insightful, please like, share, and subscribe for more updates. Stay informed and join the conversation in the comments below.